بيتر ستانو المتحدث الرسمي للشؤون الخارجية في الاتحاد الأوروبي. سيد ستانو، بدايتنا للحديث عن الأزمة الأوكرانية، والسؤال الأول لك سيد ستانو هو: بعد أن أخلفت روسيا بتعهداتها مع الاتحاد الأوروبي والمنظمة العالمية، كيف يمكن أن يثق الاتحاد الأوروبي في التعامل مع روسيا مستقبلاً، خاصة بعد أن تأكد الجميع أن بوتين لا يمكن الوثوق به وسوف يخلف أي وثيقة، أي ميثاق، أي اتفاق وأي تعهد بكل سهولة؟
This is a very good question, because what is happening now with the actions by Russian leadership is totally undermining the credibility of Russia as a country. It's totally undermining the credibility of the signature of the Russian political representatives under any international documents, because with the recent steps, what the Russian leadership did when it comes to Ukraine, they violated not only the agreement they had, the so-called Minsk agreement, under which they recognized the temporarily separated territories in the east as Ukrainian territory, but they also violated international law, because they violated territorial integrity and sovereignty of a neighboring country. And Russia is part of all the international agreements that are guaranteeing territorial sovereignty and territorial integrity and sovereignty of the countries. So this is a triple violation of everything what we understand is a system of rules and principles in the international domain. And you are right, I mean, it will be very, very hard to have any sort of trust into what Russia will promise or sign in the future.
ظهر السفير الروسي في الولايات المتحدة على شاشة تلفزيون الآن يوم الأحد وقال إن روسيا ستحترم اتفاقية مينسك، لكن في اليوم الموالي ظهر بوتين وقال عكس ذلك، وفي يوم الثلاثاء اتخذ موقفا مختلفا تماما. هذا يعكس طبعا سوء سياسة الدبلوماسية الروسية. هل علق أي من الأصدقاء الدبلوماسيين الروس حول هذا الأمر؟
This is not the role of official representatives of the European Union to disclose the nature of the discussions we have internally with our counterparts. But personally, politically, and also like humanly, I agree with you that it must be very hard to be a Russian diplomat nowadays to try to explain the aggressive behavior of the Russian leadership in the countries where the Russian diplomats are posted, because they have to justify and explain the violation of international law, the violation of international agreements, the aggression against the neighboring country. And let's not forget, Russia is a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, of an organization which is overseeing the international system of rules. So it's very, very difficult. It must be personally very and professionally very difficult for every single Russian diplomat abroad who will try to explain this blatant violation of all the rules and principles we as civilized community believe in and we subscribe to.
كيف يمكن الوثوق بكلمة روسيا الآن؟
Unfortunately, due to the recent actions and behavior by Russian leadership, the credibility of Russia on the international scene is close to zero. By violating international law, by violating its own international commitments, and by violating the treaties and agreements Russia has signed, Russia showed that its signature has no value, that its signature has no meaning, that its promises and declarations cannot really be trusted, and Russia needs to be judged only by its actions. And unfortunately, these actions now are only aggressive actions, actions of threats, escalations, and actions which are leading to a very, very dangerous conflict on European soil.
كيف تقيم أوروبا تصرفات موسكو في أوكرانيا؟
We see it as an aggressive behavior. We see it as a sign of willingness to continue the escalation. We see it as the biggest crisis and biggest threat to European security since the Second World War. So more than 7 decades after the Second World War, we have in Europe a country which behaves in an aggressive way, attacks the neighboring country and grabs away parts of its territory. This is very difficult. It's very difficult for Europeans because we believe that finally in 21st century, we will be able to live in peace and stability. And this is what we were trying to build also with Russia. But we don't know for what reasons President Putin decided to embark on a confrontational course of hostility and undermining all the international rules and principles which were established in Europe after the Second World War, which brought so much suffering and so much destruction to Europe. And now Mr. Putin behaves like the one who seems to be willing to start a new war in Europe. And this is something the international community has to take very seriously and has to push back in a united front.
ماذا لو استمرت روسيا في التحرك نحو غرب أوكرانيا؟ كيف سيكون الرد من الاتحاد الأوروبي في ذلك الحين؟
We are prepared to react in a very, very tough way. Already today, we are adopting, and we will announce shortly, the concrete sanctions and restrictive measures in response to the latest moves. That means recognition of the two breakaway regions of eastern Ukraine as independent and sending Russian occupation forces to these territories. These are sanctions measures which are taken as a first step. If Russia continues with its aggressive escalating behavior, we will take further measures and we will shut down Russia economically and financially. We don't want things to come to that, but we are determined to do it. When I say we, it's not only 27 members of the European Union. It's a huge international front of countries who are joining the European Union in defense of not only Ukraine, but in defense of international rules and international law. And it's not only United States, it's United Kingdom, it's Canada, it's Japan, it's South Korea. There are other countries signaling their support. So there will be strong response from the international community, and Russia will be basically isolating itself and reinforcing its image as aggressor, invader, and occupier, and the one who is provoking new conflict in Europe.
روسيا قالت أنها بإمكانها التعامل مع العقوبات، لكن إلى أي مدى يمكن أن تصل هذه العقوبات من الاتحاد الأوروبي؟ وأيضاً هل ستتمكن هذه العقوبات من ردع موسكو؟
Of course, Russia will not admit, or the Russian political leadership will not admit that the sanctions are hurting them, but in fact they are. We introduced a set of sanctions already in 2014 when Russia attacked Ukraine and annexed illegally parts of its territories in Crimea Peninsula. And when Russia invaded eastern parts of Ukraine and created these separated republics. Since then, look at the state of the Russian economy. I think that's the best answer about the effectiveness of the sanctions. Russia was not able to develop and consolidate its economy. The economy is not performing well. And the Russian people feel it because Russia is a very rich country, but they cannot explore all the potential of their country because of the sanctions imposed by us and our other partners. So when we impose even more sanctions, people in Russia, they will feel it and they will ask their leadership whether this is really necessary. But on the other hand, of course, we don't want to target the Russian people. Unfortunately, the Russian leadership doesn't leave us another choice, but the sanctions are not the only policy tool. The sanctions are only an accompanying instrument with which we underline our policies that we mean it really seriously, that we mean seriously the need for dialogue and the need for de-escalation. And the moment Russia starts to de-escalate, we can then lift the sanctions introduced, because the sanctions are responding to concrete actions. If there is a change of behavior, of course, we will lift the sanctions. But the sanctions are biting, trust me, and the Russians know that they are biting. They cannot admit it, but Russia will be fully isolated financially, economically, and internationally, politically. And I don't think it's any country's aspiration to be seen as the thug of the community and be ostracized and being sitting on the margins, just waving with all the weapons they have, but they have nothing else, just their weapons and manpower.
هل برأيك ستتأثر أوروبا بالعقوبات المفروضة على روسيا؟
Of course, when we take measures which are affecting trade, for example, then of course, I mean, there is a negative backlash on European countries because you are losing markets. But fortunately, the world is very big, and the world is developing, and there is always a possibility to find alternatives. And even if the sanctions are biting us as well, or we feel the negative impact of the sanctions, this is the price we are willing to pay for standing up for principles, for our principles, and defending the international order, to defend the international law. So we are ready to pay the price because it will hurt us much less than it will hurt Russia. And we are not isolated worldwide. We have plenty of opportunities to work with other partners all around the world to find alternatives to whatever losses we might feel after cutting off ourselves from Russia. But Russia cannot do the same because Russia will be isolated internationally.
برأيك سيد ستانو، هل هنالك خطط بديلة للاتحاد الأوروبي لتوفير احتياجات الغاز إذا توقفت الإمدادات الروسية؟
Of course, we are not dependent on Russian gas to survive. We are taking around average 40% of our needs from Russia, 40% is not majority. So we can survive with the remaining 60%. We are already working on alternatives, and we are negotiating with alternative suppliers. So the gas issue for us is not really the biggest thing. And we are in the process of so-called green transition. So we try to anyway change fossil fuels for renewable energies. So this just accelerates all the reforms we are doing in order not to be dependent on fossil fuels in general, not only on Russia. And of course, we will be decoupling from Russia because we see that Russia is not a serious partner, and it's not a reliable partner, even in terms of business. So this will just accelerate everything we are doing in terms of not being really in a need of having anything to do with Russia, although we would prefer, because cooperation with such a close neighbor is in vital interest, I think, of people on both sides. But unfortunately, Russian leadership decided to decouple from Europe. Russian leadership decided to be hostile with the modern civilization of 21st century. They want to turn back to the past of confrontation. They can do it if they want, but we will be surviving much better without them than they would be surviving on their own.
سيد ستانو، أخيراً لنختم، ما هو مدى الانتهاكات التي رصدتها منظمة الأمن والتعاون في شرق أوكرانيا حتى الآن؟
Well, over the last days and weeks, we are seeing increase in provocations and in ceasefire violations. And this corresponds to the political process advanced on the Russian side. So they try to present their steps as a reaction to whatever is in their minds happening to these two breakaway regions. But the fact is that the number of provocations and the number of shelling and attacks coming from the two breakaway regions against the Ukrainian territory under the governmental control is increasing, with active participation of Moscow. So this was obvious that they are just creating pretext for their illegitimate and illegal actions. So they are increasing the tensions, they are increasing the number of provocations, and this is a sign that they are determined to continue the path of confrontation and maybe drag on this crisis and maybe escalate this crisis even more to something bigger than what we are seeing now.